The war for Earth was over. The mighty Zarelian Empire, a civilization that had enslaved entire species, crushed resistance, and ruled through fear, had been defeated. Not by a grand army, not by a powerful fleet, but by the very thing they had mocked, Earth's so-called civilians. And now it was humanity's turn to strike back. The final message. Commander Vekel sat in a cold, dark cell. His hands trembled. His once proud uniform was torn, covered in dirt and dried blood. The fear he had felt during the invasion had never left him. Outside, the remains of the Zarelian forces were rounded up like animals. There was no torture, no cruel execution, just silence. The humans didn't speak much. They simply looked at the prisoners. And that was worse than anything. Vekel had seen his warriors beg for mercy. He had watched proud Zarelian officers cry like frightened children. Now, as he sat there, he waited for judgment, for punishment, for something. Then, the door to his cell opened. A human entered. Not a soldier, not an officer, just a man in simple clothes. Vekel swallowed hard. What happens now? His voice was weak. The human studied him, his expression unreadable. Your people wanted war. Vekel flinched. He already knew what was coming. Execution. Genocide. The end of the Zarelian race. But then, the human's voice remained calm. And now, you will learn what happens when humanity fights back. He placed a small device on the table and pressed a button. A hologram appeared, an image of Zarelian space. Vekel's heart nearly stopped. The Zarelian Empire was burning. Earth's revenge. After destroying the Zarelian invasion fleet, the humans had done what no one in the galaxy had dared to do. They went on the offensive. Unlike the Zarelians, the humans didn't need massive warships or planetary bombardments. They didn't announce their attacks. They didn't offer terms of surrender. They simply arrived. Across the Empire, planets fell silent overnight. Imperial leaders vanished without a trace. Entire military installations were wiped out before they could even send a distress call. The Empire's enemies, species that had been enslaved, conquered, or driven to the brink of extinction, began to rise up. And with humanity backing them, they won. The Zarelians, once the most feared civilization in the known galaxy, were now the hunted. The humans didn't just want victory. They wanted the Empire erased from existence. The Emperor's last stand. Deep within the Zarelian capital, Emperor Exalvoran sat alone. For centuries, his people had ruled with an iron grip. Now, in just a few weeks, that rule had collapsed. A transmission flickered onto his screen. Grainy, filled with static. The humans had taken control of the Empire's communication systems. And then, a voice. Not a demand. Not a warning. Not even a threat. Just a simple statement. Your time is over. Then, the transmission cut. And at that moment, Zalvoran knew. There was no escape. Moments later, the skies above the capital darkened. A shadow covered the palace as silent, invisible ships descended. And then, the Empire's reign ended. A galaxy changed forever. The Zarelian Empire was no more. Its fleets were gone, its armies scattered, and its once mighty rulers hunted like criminals. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was free. But it was also terrified. Because now, every species in the universe knew one undeniable truth. Humanity had been holding back. For all their kindness, their diplomacy, their patience, they were never weak. They had simply chosen not to unleash their full power. Until now. The final warning. A message was sent to every major civilization in the galaxy. It contained no threats, no demands, just a warning. Earth does not seek conquest. We do not desire war. But if you bring war to us, if you harm our people, you will no longer fear the Zarelian Empire. You will fear us. And with that, humanity vanished into the stars, watching, waiting, and ready to remind the galaxy why Earth never needed defenses. Then, darkness. The breaking point. Vikal watched in horror as the final strongholds of the Empire fell one by one. Their warships in orbit had been abandoned. Their communications network had been destroyed. The Empire's most elite warriors had been slaughtered. His people were begging to retreat. And yet, where could they run? The humans had let them land. They had let them spread across the planet, because it made the hunt easier. Vikal had to make a choice, either fight to the last soldier or accept the truth. They had lost. He turned to his remaining officers. Send a transmission to the fleet. The room was silent. He swallowed the shame and spoke the words he never thought he would say. We are abandoning Earth. The war was over, but the nightmare of the Zarelian Empire had just begun. The Zarelian Empire had conquered thousands of worlds. No species had ever forced them into a retreat. Their war doctrine was simple: invade, dominate, and erase all resistance. But now, standing inside the shattered remains of his own command center, Commander Vikal felt something he had never experienced before. Pure terror. The war for Earth was lost. The humans were not fighting for survival. They were exterminating the invaders. And now, the Zarelians had only one hope left: escape. The desperate retreat. Vikal stormed through the ruined halls of the Imperial Command Center, his boots crunching against shattered glass and broken equipment. His officers followed behind him, their scaly faces pale with fear. We must evacuate, one of them stammered. Our ship's in orbit. They won't wait for us forever, another added. Vikal already knew this. Zarelian warships operated under strict protocol. If an invasion force suffered catastrophic losses, the fleet would abandon the operation and return to Empire-controlled space. Their time was running out. He activated his communicator. All surviving units, fall back to extraction points immediately. We are leaving this planet. There was no response. Vikal's throat tightened. Repeat. All surviving units, respond. Silence. Only a faint static sound came through the speakers. And then, a human voice. Commander Vikal. His heart stopped. It was the same voice from before, the human who had sent the warning message. Running won't help you. Vikal's blood ran cold. Who are you? He snarled. A short chuckle came through the speakers. We're the ones you should have never woken up. Then, the transmission cut off. Vikal's hands clenched into fists. He turned to his officers. Get me a direct connection to the fleet. We need extraction now. One of the officers frantically worked on the console. His fingers trembled. Sir, we can't establish a secure line. What? Vikal stepped forward. Why? The officer's eyes widened. His voice shook. Because, sir, the fleet is. A loud explosion shook the building. Vikal staggered, gripping a nearby console for support. Alarms blared across the room. A second explosion rocked the command center. And then the reality hit him. The Zarelian warships were under attack. The unseen threat in orbit. Above Earth, the Zarelian fleet had been preparing for emergency departure. Hundreds of warships, each the size of a city, had remained in low orbit, waiting for their ground forces to retreat. But now, something was hunting them. Admiral Xorak stood on the bridge of the Zarelian flagship, his claws digging into the metal railing. His officers were shouting over one another, trying to make sense of the chaos. Ships were disappearing. One moment, a vessel was there. The next, gone. No enemy ships detected. An officer cried. There's nothing out there. Then how are we losing warships? Xorak roared. And then, the realization came. The humans had never needed spaceships. They had sensed something else. Inside the vast darkness of space, dozens of human-controlled stealth drones moved like ghosts, attaching themselves to Zarelian warships. Invisible to Zarelian scanners, silent and patient. And when the order was given, they detonated. Massive Xyrelian battlecruisers erupted into fire, their hulls torn apart from within. In mere minutes, half the fleet was gone. Sorek's voice was hoarse as he screamed, "Retreat! Get us out of here now." The surviving ships turned toward deep space, activating their jump drives. But one by one, their navigation systems failed. One by one, their engines shut down. One by one, their ships drifted into silence. And then came the final message. A single human transmission sent to every surviving Xyrelian vessel. It contained only 2 words: game over. Nowhere left to hide. Back on Earth, Vakel and his remaining forces stared at the sky. They had seen their mighty warships vanish in flames. They had watched as every escape route was sealed shut. And then, as the dust settled, nowhere is safe. It wasn't war. It was butchery. The Xyrelians tried to fight back, but it was useless. The humans didn't use guns. They didn't use plasma cannons or explosives. They used their hands. They struck with inhuman precision, appearing from the shadows without a sound. They snapped necks before their targets could even scream. They moved faster than Xyrelian eyes could track, disappearing into the night before a single shot could be fired. Panic spread through the Xyrelian ranks. Soldiers abandoned their posts, desperate to reach their warships. But even the airstrips weren't safe. The pilots trying to escape never even made it to their ships. Their bodies were found in the cockpits, their throats slit, their weapons untouched. One by one, the invaders realized the truth. This wasn't just some primitive resistance. This was a slaughter, and they were the prey. The terrifying revelation. Back on the Xyrelian flagship, Commander Vakel's breathing was unsteady as he stared at the casualty reports flashing across the holoscreen. They were losing. Badly. This was not how it was supposed to happen. The humans should have collapsed immediately. They should have bowed before the power of the Empire. Instead, his army was being systematically erased. He turned to his intelligence officer, his voice sharp. "What do we know about these humans?" The officer hesitated, his usually pale scales turning even paler. "Sir, we analyzed their planet's history, and we found something." Vakel narrowed his eyes. What? The Xyrelian Empire had conquered countless worlds, crushing rebellions, enslaving entire populations, and wiping out species that dared resist them. They had never lost a war. Until now. The invasion of Earth was supposed to be a glorious victory, an easy conquest. The humans had no planetary defenses, no fleet, no warships, and their people seemed to be ordinary civilians. The Xyrelians had expected submission. Instead, they were witnessing annihilation. The last bastion. Commander Vakel stood inside the Imperial Command Center, a massive structure the Xyrelians had built in the ruins of a former human city. It had once been a symbol of their control, but now it felt more like a prison. Reports came in hour after hour. Entire battalions had gone missing. Key locations were being overrun, and communication lines had been severed. The humans had no organized military, but they had something worse: silent hunters, unseen killers, and a patience that was truly terrifying. "Commander, our forces in the western sector have gone dark." The intelligence officer's voice was shaking. Vakel clenched his fists. "Gone dark?" "Yes, sir. Last transmission said they were under attack. After that, nothing. No distress signals, no survivors." Vakel's chest tightened. He had heard the same report too many times over the past few days. No survivors. It made no sense. The Xyrelians outnumbered the humans, had better technology, and had successfully occupied entire continents within the first week. And yet, they were being hunted. A city of ghosts. Outside, the once busy streets of the occupied city were now eerily silent. Xyrelian soldiers moved in tight formations, their weapons raised, their eyes darting to every shadow. They were the invaders, yet they walked like prey. Every building, every alleyway, felt like a trap. Sergeant Torak led a patrol through the remains of a human shopping district. He hated this silence. The last time a unit had moved through here, they never returned. "We should head back," one of his soldiers muttered. "Something's not right." Torak was about to agree, but then the lights flickered. His blood ran cold. They were here. A shadow moved in the distance. "Take," Torak shouted, raising his plasma rifle. But it was too late. From the rooftops, from the sewers, from the shattered buildings, they came. Humans. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't need to. They moved faster than the eye could track, striking from the darkness, from the blind spots. One soldier screamed as a hand pulled him into the shadows. Another fell without a sound, his throat cut before he even understood what was happening. Torak fired wildly, but his shots hit nothing. He turned to run. A cold hand grabbed his shoulder. A voice whispered in his ear, "You don't belong here." Nowhere to run. On board his flagship, Commander Veckel's rage boiled over. His forces were being eliminated, one by one, and he still had no idea how. He slammed his fist against the control panel. What is happening down there? How are these humans doing this? No one had an answer. The officers exchanged nervous glances, their once unshakable confidence now replaced with pure fear. The fleet had begun to experience strange failures. Engines malfunctioned without explanation. Entire sections of their warships lost power, leaving them stranded in Earth's orbit. Every attempt to call for reinforcements failed. Their long-range communications were jammed by an unknown force. And then the final blow came. One of their largest warships, the Tyrant's Will, exploded without warning. No enemy ships, no visible attack, just a sudden detonation that tore the vessel apart. Thousands of Zarelian soldiers were incinerated in an instant. Vickel's blood ran cold. This wasn't just resistance. This was systematic extermination. And for the first time in his long, brutal career, Commander Veckel felt fear. The final message. As he stared at the wreckage of his warship, his console screen flickered to life. A human face appeared once again. The same man who had sent the chilling message before. He was older, calm, unshaken. There was no hatred in his eyes, only certainty. "You should leave," the man said, his voice as steady as before. "Before there's nothing left of you." Veckel clenched his fists. "We are the Zarelian Empire. We do not surrender." The human tilted his head slightly, as if amused. "That's your second mistake." Vickel's breath caught in his throat. And what was the first? The human's expression darkened. "Coming here." The screen cut to black. Veckel stared at it, his heart pounding. His fleet was crumbling. His soldiers were vanishing. His entire invasion was falling apart before his eyes. And the worst part, they still didn't know how the humans were doing it. The Empire had never lost a war. But now, they faced an enemy who wasn't fighting a war at all. They were hunting. And the Zarelians were running out of time. Commander Veckel had seen war in all its forms. He had watched planets burn, stood on the ruins of fallen civilizations, and personally led conquests that had turned entire species into nothing more than whispers in history. Yet, nothing had ever made him feel this kind of fear. The Zarelian fleet still hovered over Earth, but its strength was crumbling. The proud warships of the Empire, once symbols of unstoppable power, were now prisons of fear. The soldiers trapped inside their metal hulls whispered in hushed voices, speaking of shadows in the dark, of missing comrades, of an enemy they could not see. And on the surface, the slaughter continued. The unseen executioners. In the heart of Los Angeles, Zarelian forces had taken control of the city days ago. At least, they thought they had. Soldiers patrolled the empty streets, watching the buildings around them with a kind of nervous paranoia that should not belong to a conqueror. Lieutenant Seller wiped a shaking hand across his brow. His unit had been stationed here since the first day of the invasion. It should have been simple: subdue the population, maintain control, and wait for orders. But things had not gone as planned. Not even close. At first, it was small things. Supplies went missing. Communication lines failed. Soldiers on night patrols reported hearing footsteps where there should have been none. Then the disappearances began. It was always the same pattern. A squad would go out on patrol and never come back. No bodies, no signs of battle, no traces at all. It was as if they had simply vanished into the air. Zeller's hands tightened around his plasma rifle. He didn't know how much longer he could take this. They were the Xyrelian Empire, the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. And yet, they were being hunted like weak prey on an unfamiliar world. His comlink crackled to life. "Lieutenant," a voice whispered, shaky, frightened. "We've lost another patrol." Zeller's blood went cold. He pressed the communicator against his ear. Where? Near the Eastern District. They were checking an abandoned human marketplace. "We lost contact 5 minutes ago." They never reported back. Zeller hesitated. He should send reinforcements. That was protocol. But what good would it do? Every team sent to investigate a missing squad had vanished the same way. And then the lights flickered. A chill ran down his spine. "Sir," the soldier on the other end whispered. "Something's here." Then the line went dead. Zeller's hands trembled. He turned to his men, but before he could say anything, the screaming started. The Xyrelian Empire prided itself on being the undisputed masters of war. They had crushed countless civilizations, shattered entire fleets, and left planets in ruins. Yet, for the first time in their long history, they were facing something they could not understand, let alone defeat. The humans did not fight like any species the Empire had encountered before. They had no central command, no visible chain of leadership, no military bases to strike. And yet, their resistance was precise, calculated, and ruthless. Xyrelian soldiers did not fall in battle. They simply vanished. Patrols disappeared without a sound. Communication lines were cut with surgical precision, and vital supplies were either stolen or destroyed before they could reach the front lines. Commander Vakel stood in the heart of his flagship, staring at the tactical display before him. A map of Earth's major cities flickered on the screen, each one marked with the locations of his remaining troops. Just days ago, those positions had been solid, stable, unchallenged. But now they were scattered, their forces thinning out with every passing hour. His soldiers were being picked off like prey, and no one knew how. His officers stood in uneasy silence, waiting for his orders. But what orders could he give? His men were trained to fight armies, not whatever this was. A deep, sinking feeling grew in his gut. He had made a terrible mistake. The city of ghosts. In the streets of New York, the once busy avenues were eerily silent. Xyrelian troops moved in tight formations, their weapons raised, their movements tense. The towering buildings around them had become death traps, with windows and rooftops hiding an unseen enemy. Every step felt like walking into an ambush. Private Joel tightened his grip on his plasma rifle, scanning the empty street ahead. Just yesterday, this city had been full of humans, people going about their lives, showing no sign of resistance. Now, there was nothing. No civilians, no bodies, just silence. He hated that silence. "Stay close," his squad leader whispered. "If you see anything move, shoot first." Joel nodded, his finger hovering over the trigger. His squad advanced carefully, stepping over abandoned cars and debris. The wind howled through the empty streets, sending an unnatural chill down his spine. Then something moved. A shadow, just a flicker, disappearing behind a crumbling wall. Joel froze, his heart pounding. His squad leader turned to him. "What is it?" Joel swallowed hard. I think I saw something." The squad leader nodded. "Advance slowly. Stay sharp." The Xyrelians pushed forward, weapons raised. Every corner felt like a trap waiting to spring. The shadows seemed to shift around them, whispering unseen threats. Then, the first scream shattered the silence. Joel whipped around, just in time to see the soldier beside him yanked into the darkness. No gunfire, no struggle, just gone. Panic erupted. Back to the ship. Now, the squad leader shouted, but it was too late. Figures emerged from the darkness, humans, moving with terrifying precision. No weapons, no armor, just their hands. The Zarelians opened fire, their plasma bolts slicing through the air, but the humans dodged with inhuman reflexes, closing the distance in seconds. Joel tried to retreat, but before he could take another step, he felt an iron grip around his throat. A human had him. The man's face was calm, his eyes cold and calculating. Joel struggled, but it was useless. The human's strength was inhuman. His fingers tightened, and then, with one swift motion, everything went dark. The Zarelian Empire had expected an easy victory, but what they got instead was pure chaos. Their soldiers, trained in the art of war, found themselves facing something they had never encountered before, an enemy that did not fight like an army, but hunted like predators. At first, everything seemed too easy. Zarelian ground forces had landed in every major city, expecting open surrender. The humans had no visible military, no warships rising from the planet's surface, no tanks rolling through their streets. The invasion should have been over in hours. And yet, something felt wrong. The humans were too calm. They stood in the streets, watching the invaders with an unsettling confidence, as if they knew something the Zarelians didn't. Some of them even smiled, and that was the first true warning. It didn't take long for the first soldiers to go missing. At first, the Zarelian commanders dismissed it as a minor logistical issue. Troops getting lost in an unfamiliar city, miscommunications between squads, maybe even a few cowardly deserters. But then it happened again, and again. Entire patrols vanished without a trace. No gunfire, no explosions, no distress calls. Just silence. The kind of silence that made even the most battle-hardened warriors feel uneasy. Commander Vakel sat in his warship, watching the reports come in with growing frustration. "Where are my soldiers?" he snarled. His officers had no answer. The surveillance drones captured nothing. The city streets, filled with civilians just moments ago, now looked empty. It was as if the very air had swallowed his warriors whole. Then, the first bodies were found. A squad had been sent to investigate a quiet district of the city. They had reported nothing unusual. But when another team was sent to check on them an hour later, they discovered a grisly scene. The Zarelians lay motionless on the cold pavement, their weapons still in their hands, their bodies completely intact, except for their necks, which had been snapped with precise, inhuman efficiency. No bullet wounds, no energy burns, just silent, surgical deaths. Vakel's blood ran cold. This was no ordinary resistance. This was something else. Something unnatural. Panic spread through the Zarelian ranks. Soldiers began turning on each other, accusing their own kind of betrayal, unable to comprehend how an unarmed population was eliminating them without a trace. Morale shattered. Training meant nothing against an enemy they couldn't even see. Then, the real horror began. One by one, ships started falling. Not from enemy fighters, not from planetary defenses, but from sabotage. Engineers went missing from their posts. Vital power systems mysteriously failed. Explosions ripped through Zarelian command centers. The invaders tried to tighten security, only for their own officers to be found dead in their sleep. It was as if an invisible force was dismantling the invasion from within. And the humans? They still walked through their cities calmly, as if they knew exactly what was happening, as if they had been waiting for this. Then, a chilling message was delivered directly to Commander Vakel's private communication channel. The face of a human appeared on the screen. A man, older, his expression completely neutral, his voice calm and steady. "You made a mistake," the human said. "You thought we were defenseless. You thought we had no warriors. But we are not an army. We are something far worse." Vikel's hands trembled. He had fought wars for decades. He had seen planets burn. He had watched civilizations collapse under Xyrelian rule. But he had never felt fear, until now. The screen went dark. And in that moment, Vikel understood the terrible truth. This was not an invasion. This was a hunt. And the Xyrelians were the prey. The Xyrelian Empire had conquered 100 worlds without resistance. Their soldiers were feared, their warships unmatched. No species had ever dared to challenge them. And now, they had found a new target, a small blue planet called Earth. The reports were laughable. Earth had no grand fleets, no planetary shields, no war mechs standing guard. Their cities were open, their people unarmed civilians. To the Xyrelian generals, this was not a war. This was a hunt. The Emperor's amusement. High Emperor Xyrel sat on his throne of black steel, his golden eyes scanning the battle reports. His top warlord stood before him, waiting for his orders. Commander Vikel, a veteran of countless battles, stepped forward. "My Emperor, the scouts confirm it. Earth has no standing military. Their cities are open. Their people are defenseless. They are no warriors." The Emperor leaned forward, his lips curling into a smirk. "And yet, they thrive." Tyrol asked. Vikel nodded. "They are resourceful, but without weapons, they cannot resist us." The Emperor chuckled. "How amusing. A species of prey, thinking itself safe among predators." The warlords laughed, already imagining the ease of the conquest. "Begin the invasion," Tyrol commanded. "Show these humans what true power looks like." The fleet launched within the hour. The invasion begins. Above Earth, the sky darkened as Xyrelian warships filled the heavens. The Empire had sent a mighty armada, each ship bristling with weapons. The plan was simple: descend, announce the Empire's rule, and take whatever they wanted. In New York, London, Tokyo, and a dozen other cities, massive warships hovered over the skyline. Through loudspeakers, the Empire's voice boomed across the planet. "You are now subjects of the Xyrelian Empire. Surrender, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will be crushed." But there was no panic, no screaming, no running, no desperate resistance. The humans simply looked up at the warships. Some even smiled. Confusion among the invaders. Commander Vikel watched from his flagship, his brow furrowing in confusion. Where was the fear? The terror? In every other conquest, species had begged for mercy. Their warriors had fought, their leaders had tried to negotiate. But these humans, they did nothing. His second-in-command, Captain Jor, shifted uneasily. "Sir, something is wrong. They are not reacting how they should." Vikel scoffed. "They are too foolish to understand their situation. Send in the ground forces. Let's wipe away their arrogance." Drop pods rained down, Xyrelian soldiers marching into Earth's cities. They expected immediate surrender. Instead, they found only silence. The humans stood calmly in the streets, watching the invaders with cold, measuring eyes. A Xyrelian soldier sneered at a small group of unarmed men standing near a cafe. "You think you can just stand there?" he growled, aiming his rifle. "Bow before the Empire." The tallest human, a man with gray hair and sharp eyes, raised an eyebrow. "You really don't know, do you?" the man said, his voice too steady, too controlled. The Xyrelian soldier narrowed his eyes. "Know what?" The human's smile never wavered. "That this is not an invasion." The soldier blinked. "What?" The human's eyes darkened. "This is a trap. The first to die." Before the Xyrelian could react, the human moved. No weapon, no armor, just bare hands. And in one brutal second, the soldier was on the ground, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle. The other Xyrelian staggered back, their weapons raised. But the humans didn't run. They moved. Fast, precise, deadly. 100 so-called civilians rushed forward, their hands, their movements, their very bodies trained for war. Zarelian warriors, elite soldiers of the Empire, screamed in shock as humans tore through them. No weapons, no armor, only skill. Within minutes, half of the invasion force was dead. And for the first time, the Zarelians felt something they never had before. Fear, the mistake that would doom the Empire. From the flagship, Commander Vakel stared in horror as his forces were slaughtered. It made no sense. These were civilians, unarmed people. How were they winning? Then he remembered the humans' words. This is not an invasion. This is a trap. Vakel's blood ran cold. They had made a mistake so great it would cost them everything. And by the time they realized the truth, it would already be too late.